There's a specific kind of person who watches TED Talks about procrastination instead of doing the thing they've been putting off for 3 weeks. And if you clicked on this video right now with that particular mix of curiosity and low-grade guilt sitting somewhere in your chest, you already know exactly who I'm talking about. The problem is that everyone around you thinks you're fine. You're clearly smart, you understand the irony, you can explain your own dysfunction in impressive detail, and none of that has helped even a little bit. Here's what's strange about procrastination. It's one of the most talked about problems in modern life, and also one of the least actually understood. We treat it like a character flaw, a laziness issue, a willpower issue, a discipline issue. We have apps for it, journals for it, entire productivity systems designed to defeat it. And yet somehow you're still here. You're not lazy, but you're also not exactly getting things done. And the usual explanations, just start, break it into small steps, eliminate distractions, don't quite touch the real thing. So what is actually going on here? That's what I want to get into today because I think the honest answer is a little more unsettling than most people want to admit. Think back to the last time you had a big project due. Maybe it was a report at work, a thesis, a creative project you'd been planning for months. You had plenty of time, you made a very reasonable plan, you probably even opened the document a few times, typed a sentence or two, felt a small flicker of productivity, and then somehow ended up watching something completely unrelated for the next 2 hours. And here's the part that makes it uniquely maddening. You knew the whole time that you were doing it. You weren't confused. You weren't unaware. Some perfectly rational part of your brain was sitting there watching you spiral through a Wikipedia rabbit hole about a 1990s figure skating scandal, calmly narrating, "This is insane. We need to stop. We have actual work to do." And the other part of your brain simply did not care. That feeling of watching yourself make the wrong choice in real time, powerless to stop it, that's not a productivity problem. That's something deeper. And it has a name. Tim Urban, who writes the blog Wait But Why, described this dynamic in a way that researchers have actually found surprisingly accurate. His argument is that the procrastinating brain has two competing forces inside it. One is the part that can think about the future, plan ahead, weigh consequences, what he calls the rational decision maker. The other is a creature that lives entirely in the present moment, has no memory of the past, no concept of tomorrow, and cares only about two things: easy and fun. Urban calls it the instant gratification monkey. And while that sounds like a joke, it is partly a joke. The underlying neuroscience isn't. Research in behavioral economics and cognitive psychology has consistently shown that human brains have a powerful and often irrational bias toward immediate rewards over future ones. We don't just prefer the present, we discount the future at rates that, if you ran them as financial calculations, would look frankly delusional. In other words, the part of your brain that knows the deadline matters is not the same part of your brain that decides what you actually do right now. And in that competition, the present almost always wins. Not because you're weak, because that's how the architecture works. And this explains so many things. It explains why you can spend 2 hours arranging your desk before starting the actual work, why you'll open a new tab to quickly check one thing and resurface 40 minutes later with no memory of how you got there. Why, on a Sunday afternoon with nothing scheduled and a project looming, you will feel genuine resistance to simply sitting down and beginning. A resistance that feels almost physical, like trying to push two magnets together. It also explains, honestly, some fairly heroic moments of last-minute productivity, because the procrastinator system does have a circuit breaker. Urban calls it the panic monster. It wakes up when a deadline gets close enough to feel real, when the consequences of not finishing shift from abstract to immediate. And when the panic monster shows up, everything changes. Suddenly, the same person who couldn't write a single sentence for 3 weeks produces 8 pages overnight. Not because their brain changed, because the incentive structure finally aligned with the architecture. Which is, if you think about it, a pretty exhausting way to live. But here's the part of this story that nobody really talks about. And I want you to stay with me here, because this is where it gets genuinely uncomfortable. Everything I just described, the monkey, the panic monster, the last-minute sprint, that whole system works badly and dramatically and with a lot of unnecessary suffering,
But it works. When there's a deadline, the panic monster eventually shows up, and the thing eventually gets done.
The real problem is everything else. Because there are entire categories of important things in your life that don't have deadlines. Starting the creative project you've been almost ready to begin for 4 years. Having a difficult conversation with someone you care about. Building the health habits that don't produce visible results for months. Leaving the job that's slowly draining you. Calling the person you keep meaning to call. None of those have deadlines. Which means the panic monster never wakes up. Which means the monkey stays behind the wheel indefinitely. Which means those things just don't happen. Not because you decided against them. You never decided anything. You just kept not starting and the days kept going, and at some point the window quietly closed. That's not a productivity failure. That's a life failure, and it happens so gradually and so privately that most people don't even name it until they're already deep inside it. This is the part of this conversation that most analyses of procrastination skip right over. We talk about it like it's a cute quirk, a relatable meme, a funny confession at dinner parties. And for deadline-based procrastination, that framing is mostly harmless. Yeah, you pulled an all-nighter, you still graduated. It's fine. But when Tim Urban wrote about this on his blog, the response surprised him. He expected relatability. He got thousands of emails from nurses, engineers, artists, PhD students, and they weren't funny. They were people describing the particular grief of having spent years as a spectator in their own lives, not failing to achieve their goals, but never even starting to chase them. The frustration wasn't, "I tried and fell short." It was, "I never tried at all, and I don't fully understand how that happened." That's not a scheduling problem. That's something quieter and more corrosive than that. And here's what nobody wants to say out loud. Knowing all of this doesn't automatically fix it. You can understand the monkey perfectly. You can describe the mechanism in detail. You can recognize exactly what's happening in the moment you open a new tab instead of starting the work. And that recognition will do almost nothing to stop you, because the knowledge lives in the rational part of your brain, and the behavior comes from somewhere else entirely. This is the specific paradox that TED Talk audiences understand better than most. You are, by definition, someone who seeks out ideas, someone who watches talks about cognitive biases and decision-making and the psychology of habits. And you have probably noticed, with some mixture of amusement and quiet despair, that knowing about a cognitive bias does not make you immune to it. It just makes you more articulate about your own self-sabotage. At the same time, and this is the part worth holding on to, you are also someone whose rational brain genuinely does show up. You're not indifferent to the future. The rational decision-maker in you is real and present and trying. The question is just whether you've given it the conditions it needs to actually win.
Because here's what the procrastination research ultimately points toward, and what Urban's framework implies without quite saying directly. The panic monster is not the only way. It's just the most automatic way. The alternative isn't willpower. Willpower is famously unreliable and finite. The alternative is structure. It's designing your environment so that the gap between intention and action is small enough that the monkey doesn't have room to operate. The people who are genuinely good at doing hard things aren't people whose monkey disappeared. They're people who learned, through trial and a lot of error, how to build a life where the rational decision-maker doesn't have to fight quite so hard for the wheel. And the deadline-free things, the ones that matter most and have no panic monster to enforce them, those require something the procrastinating system never developed on its own: the ability to treat your own future self as a real person. Not as a vague presence who will somehow handle it later, but as a specific person who is going to wake up in a body that you're currently steering, in a life whose shape you're currently determining. Tim Urban ends his talk with an image he calls a life calendar. It's a grid, one small box for every week of a 90-year life. It's not a lot of boxes, and the point isn't to be morbid. The point is that when you see the whole thing at once, laid out as a physical object, the abstraction of "I'll deal with it eventually" starts to look different. Eventually is a specific number of boxes away. The things you keep not starting are being decided right now by default in favor of whatever is easy and immediately available. The instant gratification monkey doesn't know that, but you do. Procrastination with deadlines is mostly just an inconvenience, dramatic, occasionally catastrophic, but ultimately contained. Procrastination without deadlines is something else. It's the distance between the life you're living and the one you are actually trying to build. That's the version worth taking seriously. Not with self-loathing. That's just more unearned discomfort in the dark playground, but with the quiet, clear-eyed recognition that the monkey is going to be there every single day, and the only question is who you're going to let drive. If this one landed for you, not just as an interesting idea, but as something you recognized from the inside, consider subscribing. It helps me keep making content that goes a level deeper than the usual takes. I've got more coming that follows this same thread. Different topics, same kind of honesty. I'll see you in the next one.